other words, man, you are nothing. You are nothing.
Can I get your autograph?
The public may see Don King as a benign rogue, but his roots go back to a violent past in blue-collar Cleveland, Ohio, where intimidation was a way of life.
Excellent. And we're coming right up to the spot where...
Yes, sir, maybe, 30 feet ahead, somewhere in there, right about in that area.
I returned to King's old neighborhood with Bob Tunney, a former Cleveland police officer. Tunney was an eyewitness when King, a numbers racketeer, stomped a man to death in 1966.
We were driving west on Cedar, and I saw a few hundred feet ahead, man lying on the sidewalk, man standing over him, kicking him in the head. We drove up there immediately, stopped the car, and I jumped out of the vehicle, and the man standing up had a revolver in his hand. So I pulled out my gun. I says, drop the gun. He took the gun, threw it on the back trunk of another vehicle that was parked there. I went over immediately and grabbed that gun, and as I did, this gentleman standing up just went over to the man lying down and gave him one vicious kick again right in the head.
Police officers rushed to aid the victim. One of them took this photograph. Detective Tunney is shown leaning over the man, Sam Garrett. Garrett weighed 100 pounds less than King, and he owed King $600.
And he kept saying to me, Donald, I'll pay you, I'll pay you, I'll pay you. He repeated it a couple times. And after that, he just lapsed in unconsciousness.
Donald King was well known to the Cleveland Police Department. His rap sheet shows that he was arrested more than 30 times between 1951 and 1966 on charges ranging from gambling to assault. In 1954, King killed a man in a shootout. It was a case of self-defense. A high school graduate with a quick mind for mathematics, King had been working in the illegal numbers business since age 18. In the early 1960s, he was the biggest numbers boss in Cleveland and was grossing $15,000 a day. A previously undisclosed FBI document reports that King was kicking back a portion of his profits to the Cleveland Mafia in return for protection of his numbers operation. I also learned new information about the Sam Garrett murder case. Detective Tunney told me he was offered what he believes was a bribe.
Probably the fall of '66, I got approached by an attorney. He says, you know, Tunney, Donald can do a lot for you. And I knew what he meant right away, and I said, well, forget it.
Police reports allege that King spent $30,000 to buy off witnesses to the killing. It seemed to work. None showed up to testify at the trial. But based on the eyewitness account of Detective Tunney, a jury convicted Don King of second-degree murder after just 4 hours of deliberation. Then, in a highly unusual move, the judge met with King and his lawyer and reduced the jury's murder verdict down to manslaughter. Nobody from the prosecutor's office was present at the meeting.
Of course, we didn't involve robbery.
Carl DeLau was Tunney's boss in the homicide unit. He suspects the case was fixed.
But definitely, why would that reduction of penalty from second-degree murder to manslaughter take place on a Saturday morning without the proper authorities being notified? Something was very radically wrong, and it was a miscarriage of justice. There's no question about it.
I got in a fist fight in what I call frustrations of the ghetto expressing themselves. When you're dealing with
King served 4 years and got out of prison in 1971. He later gave his version of the homicide to a British reporter.
How did you kill a man in a fist fight?
Well, we was fighting one another and we was kicking one another, and his head hit the concrete, and it must have been a pretty bad blow, which I have suffered deep contrition for since it happened. But nevertheless, I was instrumental in the fatality of a fellow human being whom happened to be one of my personal friends. Unfortunately for me, they found out that I was Don King, the guy that was running the numbers. Now the sensationalism came into play. Don King, the numbers baron, the numbers czar, the numbers kingpin. So they began to try me for numbers rather than for an accidental death and the fatality of a fellow human being.
As to allegations that he tampered with justice, King denies the charges. And in 1983, King was able to obtain a full pardon from the governor of Ohio for the Sam Garrett killing. It was King's friend, rock and roll legend Lloyd Price, who helped turn King from numbers to boxing. Price used to perform at a club King owned in Cleveland in the early 60s. Price also knew Muhammad Ali.
Well, I knew Ali about maybe a year or two before I met Don. I met Don in 60, 61, and I knew Ali before he even fought for any big fights. And was logged down through the years before I actually introduced the two together. I probably introduced Ali to Don by telephone.
King saw his chance. With Price's help, he convinced Ali to be the star attraction at a charity exhibition to benefit a local hospital. King, who knew little about boxing, called veteran matchmaker Don Elbaum.
And I wait for a moment, and all of a sudden, I hear on this other end, Don Elbaum! And the phone must have gone back 2 feet. He says, Don Elbaum! He said, let me tell you something, Don. He says, my name is Don King, and there's a black hospital that's in a lot of trouble here in Cleveland, and we've got to save it.
8,500 Muhammad Ali fans turned out to watch the former world heavyweight champ mix it up with 4 opponents in a 10-round exhibition.
Ali clowned with 4 different sparring partners. Don King displayed his gift for glitz by adding a fashion show and a music concert to the event.
A Cleveland hospital came out the big winner on the boxing magic of Muhammad Ali.
The hospital got $20,000, and Don King's new career was launched.
We had sessions.
Lloyd Price advised his friend that he needed a new look.
My experience in show business is that you could never let the artist be bigger than the record company. So I would tell Don, you can't let the fighters be bigger than Don King. So Don came up with the thing, make me big. And so it came up with the tuxedos. It came up that Don should have a real unique look. So one day we was just looking, Don was doing his hair like this. I said, oh, hey, that's the look. That's the look right there. So Don started combing his hair forward. And before you knew it, he had that look, and everybody started calling him Electric Lights.
King arrived on the scene at a time when most of the fighters were black, but all of the promoters were white. At a time of rising black consciousness, Elbaum advised King that he could take over boxing. It was the right time, but King was the wrong man.
When he started going into all of his black stuff and this and that, we couldn't look at each other because we would get hysterical. And there got to be a point that Don quite often says, hey, this is all bullshit. He says, this is all crap. He says, but whatever I got to do to sell, to get my point across, I'm going to sell. White, black, Chinese, he didn't care.
With Elbaum's assistance, Don King went to Jamaica in 1973 to see a heavyweight title fight. He rode to the stadium in a limousine with the champion, Joe Frazier.
The fight is over. The fight is over. The winner is George Foreman.
He sat in Frazier's corner, but when the challenger, George Foreman, unexpectedly knocked out Frazier to win the title, King jumped into the ring and pursued the new champion.
Did Frazier hurt you at any time? My man. Yeah, I got him. My man. George.
King then left the stadium in Foreman's limousine and became his promoter.
First round.
He just overwhelms you. His personality, his use of words, whether they're in place or not in place. His just character is just something that when you first meet him, it's very, very easy to become like he's been your friend forever and that he's doing everything he can for you.
In 1974, just 3 years out of prison, Don King created his masterpiece. Preaching black solidarity, King convinced Muhammad Ali, George Foreman, and the black government of Zaire to join in what would become known as the Rumble in the Jungle.
Put a
blessing on us, oh great one.
King put together a boxing match and a music event in a $14 million deal, which few people expected would ever take place.
Hello, darling. How are you? Miss Etta James. Hello, Etta, darling. How are you? I'm delighted to see you.
In a brilliant stroke of salesmanship, King convinced the government of Zaire to put up $10 million to finance the fight, even though the country was mired in poverty. Of the three men who started King out in boxing, two were still with him, Muhammad Ali and Lloyd Price, who was now a partner with King in the music deal. Don Elbaum had been cut out by King and was left behind.
Foreman's throwing more punches now. Maybe this could be the tactic of Ali to let the man punch himself out. 30 seconds left in round 8.
The fight was memorable, pitting an undefeated George Foreman against Muhammad Ali, a 3-to-1 underdog.
Another sneaky right hand. This time he works over the shoulder of Foreman. Gets the combination.
Ali won with a volley of punches in the 8th round. The event made Don King, but even in his triumph, King betrayed another one of the men who had helped get him his start and who had been his loyal friend. He cheated Price out of his share of the partnership.
I know that I should have a piece of the business because Don told me I should have a piece of the business. In fact, we should be 50-50 partners. To this day, and that was in 1974, I haven't got paid, even though I was locked into a letter of credit.
6 years later, King would betray the last of the men who helped give him his start. After Muhammad Ali had suffered a brutal beating in his last championship fight, King shortchanged him out of $1 million. Ali sued to get his fair share of the purse. But King found the one man who could get Ali to drop the suit, Ali's longtime friend and Muslim brother, Jeremiah Shabazz. King asked Shabazz to deliver payoff money to Ali and have him sign a release.
I was in Don's office. Don gave me the money with specific instructions. Don't give this money to Ali unless he signs that paper.
And it was $50,000 on his desk?
Yeah, it was 50,000 cash dollars, yes.
Ali, his health deteriorating and facing years of expensive litigation, accepted the cash and signed the release.
I'll never forget when I presented the documents back to Don, he was just so pleased. He said, you know, I had done a real great job. He thanked me, and, you know, I was his boy at that time. Don and I would still be friends, except that this guy, he just uses people. When he uses you up, then he has no more need for you. He goes on to the next one. You're just so much cannon fodder, just a nothing.
But Muhammad Ali and Lloyd Price are not bitter about how Don King used them. Price has sold over 42 million records and says he is too content to brood about the past. He and King are still friends, and their plan to make King the biggest promoter in boxing had worked.
It's just great to be an American. Don King. Only in America, John. You're a star. You know you can do anything. Any profession you want to. I was about boxing. You got it. Let me sign you up.
After the Rumble in the Jungle, Don King held a virtual monopoly on the heavyweight championship for the next 17 years, controlling all major contenders and TV rights to their bouts. Seth Abraham, at home box office, negotiated with him for 11 of those years.
Don's hair, his jewelry, his lingo, his jargon is all an act. It's to confuse, it's to obscure, it's to de-arm people. He is crackling bright. I mean crackling bright. His mind moves very, very quickly. I mean, I think in another walk of life, he'd be a grand chess master. He'd be a grand chess master. That's what he would be. So he would be the equal to and surpass most of the CEOs and executives that I know and do business with.
This is eighth and final round action. The U.S. Boxing Championship Series coming to you live from the United States Naval Academy.
Don King went on to recruit new partners. In 1977, ABC gave him $1.5 million to promote a series of televised fights.
John Boudreaux.
They gave it to Johnny Boudreaux. The crowd doesn't believe it. Scott Ledoux doesn't believe it.
But there was fraud involved. Inferior boxers controlled by King were inserted into the tournament by doctoring the records. The venture collapsed in scandal. ABC investigated and found that there was unethical conduct, but that no laws had been broken.
You solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give the subcommittee to be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God. Thank you.
A congressional committee held public hearings, and ABC executive Roone Arledge admitted poor judgment.
Couldn't you have postponed the telecast until you were able to work out these problems?
The promoters, I don't know, we probably could have. The promoters, I think, told us that they couldn't, that they had the fighters lined up and they were in training, and, you know, it's a fairly complicated process. Yeah, I guess in hindsight we could have done that and probably should have.
But in the end, Congress did nothing, and ABC continued to do business with Don King. The whole escapade should have been an early warning to the networks, casinos, and boxing commissions, but it was ignored by all.
A great many of the fighters who were in the tournament.
During the 1980s, a dozen fighters never reached their full potential under Don King. Tim Witherspoon is one of this group known as the lost generation of heavyweights. Witherspoon's career has suffered from litigation, demoralization, and distraction. Despite winning the world championship twice, boxing has left a bad taste in his mouth.
I thought that boxing was peaches, ice cream, and cake, you know? And then when I get in here and I see all this dirt and smut and all this, and I'm saying, oh, man, but I gotta make $1, you know, so I'm in it.
Witherspoon's career got off to a promising start. By 1982, he won his first 13 fights, 10 by knockout. He soon met a man who wanted to be his promoter.
I felt the presence of Don King around about the 12th or 13th fight.
How'd you feel it?
Yeah, because every time I fought, he was hollering out, "Terrible Tim! Terrible Tim! We're gonna be all right."
Don King had the connections to move Witherspoon into the big time. King scheduled a fight in Cleveland in 1982. But Witherspoon got ill with an ear infection, and on the advice of his doctor, tried to postpone the fight. King asked the Cleveland Boxing Commission to suspend Witherspoon's license. If Witherspoon would sign a long-term contract, King said, the suspension would be lifted.
He said, the commission is me. He said, I'm the commission. Them guys ain't nothing. He said, real? He said, it's me. I said, he said, well, the only way to get lifted up if you sign this deal with me. And I said, well, I'm not signing it. And I went home, and like I said, the money was like, I was pulling mothballs out my pocket.
With no money and no license, Witherspoon soon reconsidered. He went to Don King's office in New York City. According to Witherspoon, King spread 4 contracts on the table. He promised to have the suspension lifted and give Witherspoon a shot at the title if Witherspoon would sign and accept King's stepson, Carl, as his manager. A manager and a promoter have separate responsibilities. A manager looks after the fighters, a promoter looks after the events. But Don King pulled all the strings, reducing his stepson to a puppet.
Don said, Carl is me, I'm Carl. He always used that phrase, so-and-so is me, and that means that's him all the way. I never really sat down and talked with Carl about nothing, got to do with management. He always would come to me and say, I got to ask my dad something. My dad sent me over here to see what y'all need.
But Carl King would get 50% of Witherspoon's earnings, even though a 50% take by a manager is prohibited by boxing rules. King got around that problem by having Witherspoon sign 2 managerial contracts, one for the 50% fee and another, which would be filed with the state boxing commissions, which called for a legal 33% fee. King also had Witherspoon sign a contract which was totally blank.
Did you think about bringing a lawyer to this meeting?
He said you don't need, we couldn't do that. We weren't allowed to do that. Even in the past, even after that, he had told me don't, because we wanted a representation, and he said, if you got to do that, don't come.
Here he is, the undefeated heavyweight champion of the world, Larry Holmes.
King kept his word. He got the suspension lifted, and then got Witherspoon a title fight.
Larry's hurt. Keep a look. We'll keep. Larry's hurt. Yes, he is. He's hurt. He's hurt now. We're in the ninth round. The underdog, Witherspoon.
Witherspoon fought one of the best fights of his career, but lost in a split decision.
Retaining his title in his 15th defense, Larry Holmes. In the mind of Tim Witherspoon, he has to believe he won.
Witherspoon was paid $53,000 for the fight. But he soon learned that another fighter, who was knocked out by Holmes a few months later, got paid 6 times as much, $350,000. This fighter had someone other than the Kings managing his career. Witherspoon could still celebrate. King was getting him the fights, and Witherspoon figured when he was champion, like Larry Holmes, the $1 million paydays would come.
My lords, ladies and gentlemen, presenting from Philadelphia, the champion, Tim Witherspoon.
By the summer of 1986, Witherspoon was the heavyweight champion and felt his big payday had finally come. King had made a match for him to defend his title in England against British champion Frank Bruno. He first heard the news through his manager, Carl King.
He said, if we're going over there, we getting paid. He says, it's got to be a lot of money, right? That's the first time he said anything like that to me, right? So he said, I'm going to go ask my father what we're going to get.
And from West Ham, London, the challenger, Frank Bruno.
I know that when you go into another country with your title, you're getting paid double. You're not going there in his backyard to fight for pennies. I knew this, you know? So I said, hey, I know I'm going to be rich now.
What did you imagine you were going to be paid?
I imagine, I thought within myself that I knew I was going to get robbed, but he would be generous and give me maybe 600, 700,000. I knew I had Frank Bruno. I knew I had him. Whether it was the 11th round, I knew that he was wearing down. We both landed rights, but mine landed more flush. I hit him and saw that wobble. I said, it's mine.
Bruno is in a heap of trouble here.
And I put all of it in, and I pulled an overhand right long, boom, and it bent him down. He went into rope, then I finished him off, boom, and he went down. I was the happiest man in the world. And the guys was in the ring, so I was the happiest man in the world. And that kind of good feeling, it made my soreness feel good.
Later that night, Witherspoon and Carl King met up with Muhammad Ali. Witherspoon had been a former sparring partner for Ali. Now, he was the champion.
That was the greatest thing in my life that I could experience, right? But you know what Ali said to me? He whispered in my ears. He said, I know you're getting robbed. I swear. He said, I know you ain't gonna get all your money. But joking, and I laughed at him, you know?
The fight generated millions of dollars in revenue, including a total gate of $2 million and $1.7 million more for the American television rights. But when Tim Witherspoon got home, he received a check for only $90,000. He immediately called Don King.
He said, Timmy? I said, yeah, Don, what's all this here $90,000? He said, well, really what it is 90, half, you got a nickel. He said, you got a nickel, Carl get his cut, and then you had expenses. I said, man, this is crazy.
King's reference to a nickel meant that Witherspoon's share of the purse was $500,000. King then subtracted expenses, the biggest being $250,000 for his stepson, Carl. To make matters worse, Witherspoon found out that the challenger, Frank Bruno, got paid $900,000.
At Wembley, ended up the
Seth Abraham and HBO put up the money which bankrolled the fight.
But when you read in the papers that the champion took home $90,000 and the challenger took home $900,000, what did you think?
I thought it was unusual, but in boxing, lots of things are unusual. HBO is a broadcaster, not a promoter. We do not see fighter contracts. We do not ask to see them. We have no jurisdiction to see fighter contracts. I don't mean just in a Witherspoon situation. I mean in any situation. We're not promoters in that sense. So did I think it was unusual? Well, lots of things in boxing are unusual. Did I ask Don about it? Sure I did. But he said that's something that he was taking up with Tim. Did I pursue it? No, I didn't pursue it. But again, in boxing, there are lots of things that are very, very unusual.
And now, my good friends, introducing the principals.
Witherspoon was totally demoralized when he faced his next opponent, James Bone Crusher Smith. But King had put himself in a no-lose situation. Without Witherspoon's knowledge, King had made his stepson Carl Bone Crusher's manager on the eve of the fight. This meant that Carl King was managing both fighters in the same match, a conflict of interest unusual even by boxing standards. Witherspoon lost his title in the first round. But in defeat, he had won liberation from Don King.
I was happy. It was over because I didn't want to be around Don King anymore. I knew that was it. And I was so happy after the fight, I didn't care.
Tom Moran is Witherspoon's friend and current manager.
No, at that point I realized that it was something that was so much bigger than Tim and so much more powerful, that Don King was, at that time, probably, if not the most powerful person in sports. He was certainly up there in the top 2 or 3. And boxing was a sport where it was kind of Tim against Don King one-on-one, and Don King's a sharp, slick individual, and you can't expect somebody like Tim, who's got an amazing skill in one area, to have those kind of skills in another area. And I felt that he was just a victim of the situation in that sport.
Tim Witherspoon was now broke. He filed a $25 million lawsuit against Don and Carl King, alleging fraud and conflict of interest. King retaliated by blacklisting Witherspoon from fighting any boxer he promoted, which included most of the top 10 heavyweights. After some damaging pretrial evidence was obtained by his lawyers, Witherspoon says threats and intimidation followed.
How can Don intimidate you?
He has a lot of money. Money is power. And I'm sure everybody knows what can come after that. I mean, everybody knows that, put it this way, I have got as far as arming myself. Arming myself for protection reasons and stuff like that.
You fear physical violence?
Oh, that's in the game. That's in the game.
He's just playing it safe.
Tom Moran repeated to me that the threats were real.
He was threatened that if he didn't settle the lawsuit by the end of the week, he wasn't going to have to worry about settling the lawsuit because he wasn't going to be breathing. So
I've heard charges that Don King uses his long association with the mob to intimidate boxers like Witherspoon. But King vehemently denies any connection with organized crime. So I visited Joe Spinelli, who is New York's top corruption investigator. Spinelli investigated King for the FBI from 1980 to 1984.
How much, if any, organized crime involvement did you find with Don King?
Well, throughout the course of the investigation, I had individuals who were informants for the FBI provide me on a regular basis with information that King was meeting with organized crime figures. Also, in the course of the investigation, I had an individual who was the then trainer of Larry Holmes, Richie Giacchetti, provide me with a consensually recorded tape that he had with Don King, in which Don King himself talks about having had to sit down with an organized crime figure because of a dispute with a rival promoter.
Both the mob and King benefited from this relationship. According to a New Jersey Crime Commission report, mobsters got lucrative closed-circuit TV deals for some of King's fights. And several fighters told me King used organized crime to intimidate them. Blinky Palermo, known as organized crime's ambassador to boxing, was often used by King as an intimidating messenger to Witherspoon and other Philadelphia fighters. Palermo fixed fights and went to prison in the 1960s for trying to extort control over a boxing champion. When Richard Giacchetti, Larry Holmes' trainer, turned over to the FBI 6 secretly recorded conversations with King, Giacchetti began to get death threats. In a secretly recorded conversation with an FBI informant in 1981, Giacchetti said he had been warned by a mafia hitman to lay off King. But the Justice Department never prosecuted King for racketeering. Holmes and his trainer, Giacchetti, balked before the grand jury. Giacchetti would later recant his entire story. It all says to me that boxing is the only jungle where the lions are afraid of the rats.
That's a perfect example, Jack, of what I'm talking about a fighter who was intimidated and just could not come forward and tell the truth.
Today, a federal grand jury indicted Don King and Constance Harper, president and vice president of Don King Productions, in 23 counts.
The best the feds could ever do was indict King in 1984 for tax evasion. King was acquitted of all charges. 6 months later, he flew the jurors to London to see the Bruno Witherspoon fight as a token of his appreciation.
Sun City is the showplace of a Puttetswana.
By the mid-1980s, Don King had promoted fights in England, Zaire, Panama, and the Philippines. Now a South African resort called Sun City was looking for a piece of the action. A group of performers made this video to argue the case. King had joined a boycott group led by Arthur Ashe. But at the same time, King tried to convince David Bay, a heavyweight he was promoting, to fight in South Africa.
How did Don justify your fighting in South Africa?
First, he wanted me to go. He wanted me to go. He said, this is a big opportunity for you, fighting for the heavyweight championship of the world. And you'll bring the title back home. We had the title. And I said, nah, but a whole lot of people gonna be mad at me, and I wouldn't want that. So I got up, and I started walking downstairs, then Don came right behind me.
Oh, he said, I'm proud of you. I'm proud of you, Teddy Bear, what you did. He said, that's the right thing you did, turn the fight down going to South Africa. And I'm saying, yeah, right, you know.
Bay turned down $850,000 and did not go to South Africa.
Ladies and gentlemen, introducing Sun City WBA Heavyweight Championship of the World.
King did not go to South Africa either, but he did convince another heavyweight, Greg Page, to take Bay's place.
Oh, good right hand from Page, and Footsie's legs buckled a little. I think he's in trouble. Hey, he's down. That was a
We then got Greg Page to go, and Greg Page knocked out Jerry Coetzee.
Bob Lee is president of the International Boxing Federation.
Well, according to the promoter in South Africa, he paid Don King $1 million for that fight.
King was rebuked by Arthur Ashe and forced to resign from the executive board of Artists and Athletes Against Apartheid. I had caught up with Bobby Lee and the South African part of the story last March when I went to Vegas to try to get an interview with Don King. King had refused my request for an interview for several months, and I thought the press conference before the Tyson-Ruddock fight would be an opportunity to seek him out in person.
I don't want to predict and prognosticate and tell a lie.
King was working the reporters individually when he began to criticize Bob Lee and the International Boxing Federation for ranking black South African fighters.
Bobby Lee is no longer fit to be the president of an organization. He's dealing with South Africa.
King's tirade began when I asked him about his own dealings in South Africa.
Thank you, Don. Don, can we talk to this person? What about the million you got from Sun City? Well, the million I got from Sun City, and this I'm going to say to you because to me, you means nothing, because you have been one of the guys who have vilified me, crucified me, castigated me all throughout my career, not objectively, not fair and impartially. No, let me talk now. We made 3 appointments with you to give you another thing. As far as I'm concerned, you're a scumbag. I don't have no use for you at all. You may be the greatest as you think you're the greatest, but to me, you as a man to man, you are nothing. You are dirt, and I just walk around you to keep them stepping in. So you don't have to worry about me. So I don't have no use for you, Jack Newfield. Yes, I made the mistake. I made the mistake of not going to South Africa.
Then Don King did something I've never seen him do. He admitted he'd been wrong.
I stand reproved. I apologize for what I did because I understand that it was wrong. Even though I didn't go there, I thought I could do it at an arm's length transaction. But for a scumbag like you, Jack Newfield, that is prejudiced, you don't have no right to do what you do. You're not fair.
King continued to vent his anger and then had my press credentials revoked.
Which is the fact that we control who comes to this. It's a privilege, not a right, and I'm rejecting.
It's the First Amendment right to ask a question at a press conference.
It's a private property. It's a private event.
We were approved.
It's been changed.
Why?
Because I said so.
Later, King's men denied Frontline all access.
Here, take this man's tape out of this camera.
The argument spilled out into the hallway when King's men tried to take the videotape out of our camera.
No, I want the tape out of this camera. This is a private property.
King's stepson, Carl, also tried to intervene.
I ain't gonna be as nice as my father. I'll beat your fucking ass.
Hotel security was called, and the argument quickly dissipated. King had successfully avoided answering any more of my questions, and I was glad to get out of there. Right after my press credentials were yanked, I watched Mike Tyson being led away by a sea of bodyguards. Mike Tyson's relationship with Don King has all the makings of an American tragedy. Tyson and I both grew up in the Bedford-Stuyvesant section of Brooklyn. I met him when he was 14 years old through my friend, former light heavyweight champion, Jose Torres.
I don't know, he's like when he was in jail, you know. He is now like in jail with all this bunch of people, you know, surrounding him and overprotecting him on behalf of Don King.
Mike Tyson was sent to the Tryon Youth Correctional Facility in upstate New York after growing up as a mugger and predator on the streets of Brooklyn. He was 13 years old. Bobby Stewart, a counselor at the reformatory and former professional boxer, first saw Tyson in 1979.
He had acted out in some way, and he was being escorted through the field.
by two of the bigger staff on campus. And reports were that he was be very careful of him, very violent.
Tyson told Stewart that he wanted to learn how to box. After teaching him the basics, Stewart then brought Tyson to a gym above the police station in Catskill, New York, to meet Customato.
That's it. See, ain't no way he's going to hit you then, right? And remember, it's always good to throw the punch where you could hit him and he can't hit you. That's what the science of boxing is all about. Remember, from the side...
D'Amato had developed many boxers, including world champions Floyd Patterson and Jose Torres. He spotted Tyson's potential immediately.
He said, barring outside distractions, if that kid is able to, you know, concentrate his efforts on becoming a fighter, and if he wants it, importantly, he said that's a heavyweight champion of the world.
The joy of finding one last great fighter may have prolonged D'Amato's life. And D'Amato saved Tyson from returning to a life of crime. He legally adopted him. Then in 1985, Cus D'Amato died. Jim Jacobs, one of Tyson's co-managers, took D'Amato's place as Tyson's surrogate father. One year later, Tyson fulfilled D'Amato's prediction.
That was a right to the body and an uppercut to the head, and Berbick is down.
In a devastating second-round knockout, Mike Tyson, age 20, became the youngest heavyweight champion in boxing history.
It's over. That's all, and we have a new era in boxing. Mike Tyson.
His managers, cornermen, and friends ran to congratulate him. Tyson kissed Jim Jacobs. But in March of 1988, Jacobs died, and Tyson lost his second father substitute. Before Jacobs was buried, Don King made his move, using black solidarity to seduce Tyson.
I mean, the perception of the public, blacks in particular, I spoke to them, they think they are proud that Don King is doing what used to be controlled by the white man, the promotional business, and that he's there because he's tough. You know, he doesn't take shit from anybody.
According to Torres, who was King's confidant at the time, King also used anti-Semitism to get Tyson to abandon his friends.
He said to me, you know, you have to understand, Jose, that Bill Caton, Shelley Finkel, the Jacobs, the Finkers, the Catons, Jews, they want to control the situation. You don't understand this. I know. I deal with these people.
He even got Tyson to abandon his surviving manager, Bill Caton.
King actually came here and said to me, sure, I've poisoned Mike's mind against you. You give me my 4-year exclusive emotional agreement and I'll unpoison him.
By the fall of '88, Tyson's life was in chaos. He was estranged from Bill Caton, and King was still trying to muscle in. But things got worse when he separated from Robin Givens, whom he had married 7 months earlier. Steve Lott was Tyson's assistant trainer and close friend.
Robin had a tremendous influence negatively on Mike's character and emotion. And after she left, later in the year, Don found it very easy to jump in because that character that was so powerful before in Mike was in crumbles, was in shambles. And Mike was no match for Don at that time emotionally to battle his wit and his con.
King soon had complete control over Tyson's personal life and boxing career. Both have declined ever since.
Situation at the time, but
Rolling willingly just to try to get in the shot that will finish things in.
Oh, the uppercut.
What an uppercut by Douglas, and down goes Tyson.
In 1990, in a stunning upset, Tyson lost his title to Buster Douglas, a complete unknown.
It's over. It's over.
Mike Tyson has been knocked out.
Unbelievable.
And Tyson was indicted for rape 2 months ago.
Back up! Back up! Back up!
Everything his adopted father, Cus D'Amato, had tried to prevent had come true under the tutelage of Don King.
If he went somewhere where the business was better and he became a greater fighter and more of a hero and respected and revered by everyone in sports and everyone on the planet, I'd say, Mike, I'd shake your hand because you did it. You did a great job. But that's not what happened. I'm jealous that they have my friend, and they've destroyed the greatest fighter I've ever seen.
I don't know what to say. I want the best for Mike. You know, if that's I tend to believe history, if you look at the fighters Don King's been involved with, I see mostly suits that are all suing him, it seems. I hope in Mike's case it's different, that things are changed. But if you go on past history, you know, he's going to be a loser in the long run.
If Mike Tyson fights again under Don King, it will add millions to King's empire. An empire which already includes a $5 million mansion in Ohio, condos in Los Angeles and Las Vegas, and 2 townhouses in New York. In 1988, he bragged that his company grossed more than $100 million a year. All this from being the most successful entrepreneur in boxing history, promoting over 200 championship fights.
Mr. King, will you tell us what your present residence is?
32 East 69th, New York, 10021.
The only irritants for King are the lawsuits. 6 world heavyweight champions and more than 20 fighters have taken King to court. King has been sued more than anyone in boxing history and has paid more than $2 million in settlements.
Why do so many fighters, his fighters, end up suing him?
Unfortunately, litigation is part of the sport of boxing. It is. I mean, that just comes sort of with the territory. Why do so many? He's visible. He's very visible. He is a lightning rod, not because of his hair, but because of his general demeanor and bombast. Boxing, you know, doesn't have a schedule, doesn't have a commissioner, doesn't have a series of teams. It's not a highly structured sport. Don works within the disstructure or the disorganization of the sport.
The possibility that boxing will ever be cleaned up is remote. State regulation is a joke. If Nevada ever did crack down, the action would simply shift to Atlantic City. And at the national level, there's no interest in regulation.
But here in round 1, Lewis is like a spring ready to uncoil.
Despite the artistry of a Joe Louis, Ray Robinson, or Muhammad Ali, boxing is a hustler's paradise. 40 years ago, sports writer Jimmy Cannon called it the red light district of sports. It still is. Even at the championship level, boxers remain the exploited workers. Unlike other professional athletes, boxers have no union, no pension plan, no health insurance, no power. Those who profit, the networks, the casinos, and the promoters, all wink at the abuses and say, it's only boxing. At the top of it all is Don King. We endorse him, we even celebrate him as he turns young men of bright promise into victims.
All right.
Precious Lord, once again, your warrior goes into battle.
Tim Witherspoon is slowly working himself back into contention. Under new management, he has won his last 10 fights. Soon, his $25 million lawsuit against the Kings will come to trial.
Oh, yeah. Tim, man. All right, Tim, man. Terrible time. Terrible. Your turn. You're the man. Terrible, man.
Witherspoon will never be as great a boxer as Tyson or Ali, but I will always remember him as the fighter who stood up to Don King.
You know, that's Don King. To rip somebody off is a feeling he get. And he get that big old knot in his pocket, and he be rubbing them. He loved money. They say the root of all evil is money. And that's what he is, an evil man.
Funding for Frontline is provided by the financial support of viewers like you and by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. Frontline is produced for the Documentary Consortium by WGBH Boston, which is solely responsible for its content. For video cassette information about this program, please call this toll-free number, 1-800-328-PBS-1. This is PBS. For a printed transcript of this or any Frontline program, send $5 to Journal Graphics Incorporated, 1535 Grant Street, Denver, Colorado, 80203. To order by credit card, call 303-831-9000.